Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Neurotech Group. I'm really excited today to have Jeff Sebo here. So Jeff is a professor at NYU, but I've become aware of your work, Jeff, really through an ADK podcast that was absolutely mind-blowing. I think that people are really starting to think a little bit more about digital minds and what it could look like to co-inhabitate a space with them. And usually I think that you very quickly drift off into very difficult questions of philosophy of mind and so forth. And what I really loved about your podcast is that you kept it really practical and pragmatic. You definitely lined out a few things that we can know, things that we cannot know, things that we should be careful, but it was very pragmatic and practical. And I really loved that. And then I reached out to you to see if you want to come on a podcast with us. And then we met in person, like totally accidentally.
That was nice, yeah.
Yeah, we shared a panel together in Berlin the other day together with Anders as well. That was really wonderful. So it's really nice to see you again virtually now. And yeah, I will share more info about you in the chat. But if you want to just take it away, share a little bit about your perspective on digital minds, perhaps how your perspective on animal minds influences that as well, that would be wonderful. And then we can kick it off with questions. And for everyone who's listening in right now, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I will circle them to Jeff and ask you to unmute whenever we have time. So thanks a lot for joining.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you again for inviting me to do this. And yeah, it was fantastic to surprisingly run into you and get to be on a couple of panels together in Berlin. So nice to see you again here. And to everybody else on the call, thanks for being here for this hour to have this conversation. And to anybody viewing in the future, again, same to you. Appreciate your taking the time to think about this issue. So as Allison mentioned, I teach at NYU and I also direct the NYU Mind Ethics and Policy program. And this program is dedicated to examining the consciousness and sentience and agency and moral and legal and political status of non-humans of various kinds, particularly invertebrates and AI systems, given how potentially important and neglected and difficult they are when it comes to trying to understand what, if anything, they might want or need, or what, if anything, we might owe them. So we try to make progress on these questions. What, if anything, might invertebrates or AI systems want or need? What, if anything, might we owe them? How can we build a society that gives them proper consideration, whatever that might mean? And so what we can focus on in this conversation is digital minds, so AI systems and other silicon-based or non-carbon-based cognitive systems. And as I think you all are aware, this is increasingly controversial because of how many people are finding mentality in AI systems, particularly large language models, and they might or might not be right to do that, right? We have conversations with LLMs and they might say, I am conscious, or I am not conscious. I am a person. I am not a person. I have rights. I lack rights. They might make these utterances. And either way, we might get taken in. We might experience them as subjects and want to protect them. We might experience them as objects and want to exploit them without feeling guilty. And clearly, the conversation is reaching a kind of fever pitch, and a lot of people are staking out very, characteristically for our current moment in time, very polarized, extreme perspectives. Either they definitely are conscious and they definitely matter, or they definitely are non-conscious and they definitely do not matter, and are usually saying that on the basis of intuition or snap judgment of some kind. And so I think that as a starting point, it helps to back up, take a breath, and recognize that as with many social issues about which we are unfortunately polarized, about which we unfortunately are occupying these extremes, as with many other such issues, this issue is both very important and very difficult. Very important because it matters a lot whether we treat these new kinds of beings as moral subjects, whether we extend them welfare protections, whether we extend them rights. If we get this wrong, it could be bad. If we extend them protections unnecessarily, we could be harming ourselves totally unnecessarily. If we do not extend them protections, but they in fact need them, then we would be once again exploiting and exterminating vulnerable non-human populations, as we so often have done before. So this is a very important issue. The stakes are very high either way, but also a very difficult issue because it forces us to confront some of the hardest problems in science and philosophy, like the problem of other minds, the problem of consciousness. How can I know what, if anything, it might be like to be a radically different kind of being? How can I know whether they can consciously experience positive and negative states like pleasure and pain and happiness and suffering and satisfaction and frustration? And even if they could, how can I know how intense those experiences would be for them, how much those things would matter to them. How can I know which things are good or bad for them, in which things they take pleasure or in which things they take pain? How can I know whether they need anything at all and how much they need those things and what it is they might need? So what I would like to discuss is how I think we should go about considering those types of questions thoughtfully and responsibly, given how important and how difficult this topic is. We need a way forward that honors both the importance and the difficulty. It can be really tempting to recognize how important this issue is, and so to dismiss the difficulty because it feels uncomfortable to recognize something matters and you have no idea what to do about it. But similarly, it can feel really tempting to recognize the difficulty and then dismiss the importance for the same reason. If something is really difficult, then it would be concerning if it also was like an urgent issue where you really had to be taking action. So I think step one is to acknowledge that this is an important and difficult question. We really have to make thoughtful decisions about whether to extend protections or rights to radically different types of beings, but we might not really know how to do that because of all sorts of different kinds of foundational disagreement and uncertainty. So I am going to sketch a way forward that, as Allison said, and I appreciate this, Allison, I think is both rigorous in a way that honors the difficulty and complexity, but then also practical in a way that helps us find a way forward in spite of that difficulty and complexity, in spite of ongoing disagreement and uncertainty. And a starting point just is to recognize that there is a lot of disagreement and uncertainty, both about the values and about the facts. So regarding the values, we still have a lot of disagreement and uncertainty, for example, about what it takes to have the capacity for welfare and what it takes to be a moral patient. In other words, what it takes to be the kind of being that can be benefited or harmed and that matters for their own sake, to whom we can have duties for their own sake. What does it take to be a subject in that sense, to be a moral patient in that sense? Some people think you need to be sentient. That means you need to be able to consciously experience positive or negative states like pleasure, pain, happiness, suffering. Other people think all you need is to be conscious. You do need to have conscious experiences. It needs to feel like something to be you, but you don't need positive or negative states like pleasure, pain, happiness, and suffering. The mere fact that you have subjective states at all is enough. Other people think agency is necessary or sufficient, that what you need is to be the kind of being who can set and pursue goals in a self-directed manner, who can engage in goal-directed behavior. So there are these different moral theories about what it takes to be a welfare subject or what it takes to be a moral patient. Is it a matter of experiencing pleasure and pain? Is it a matter of experiencing anything at all? Is it a matter of having goals and desires and preferences? So we have that kind of disagreement and uncertainty about values to contend with. But then we also have empirical, scientific, descriptive disagreement and uncertainty about each of these potential bases of welfare and moral considerability. For example, suppose you think consciousness is necessary in order for a being to be a moral subject, in order for a being to merit moral consideration for their own sake. Then we have to figure out how we can tell whether a being is conscious, how we can tell whether a being can have subjective experiences, feelings, and so on and so forth. And that is famously really difficult to do because the only mind that any of us can directly access is our own. You might be able to directly tell that you have subjective thoughts and feelings and experiences, but with everybody else, you can only make an inference about us based on behavioral and anatomical and evolutionary continuities with you, right? You can see that, when you feel pain, that corresponds to like stubbing your toe and yelling, ouch, and certain neurons firing in your brain. And so you can make an inference that when I stub my toe and I yell, ouch, and those same neurons fire in my brain, I probably am experiencing pain too, based on an analogy with you. And broadly speaking, we can use this methodology for other animals too. But that still leaves room for a lot of disagreement and uncertainty about the details. And in general, experts still accept a wide range of views about the nature of consciousness and similarly sentience and agency. Some people accept really demanding theories. They say that in order to count as conscious, in order to have conscious feelings, experiences, etc., you need to have a quite high degree of cognitive complexity, a quite high degree of cognitive centralization, a quite high degree of, material substantive continuity with the human brain. So in other words, you need to be really complex. You need to have a centralized cognitive system, and you need to be built out of carbon-based neurons. So some people have that quite demanding view. Other people have a very undemanding view. There are many experts, maybe about 7 to 10% of philosophers, I think, indicated that they support or lean towards such views in a recent survey. A lot of people think that consciousness is just a fundamental property of all matter in the universe. There might be a very minimal sense in which even protons or electrons are conscious, to say nothing of more complex systems out of which protons or electrons are built, or that consciousness is a basic property of any minimal information processing system, that all you need is to be any kind of system that processes any kind of information, and you again have at least minimal consciousness. And then there are a lot of views that are somewhere in the middle that say, okay, you might not need all that stuff, like a really high degree of complexity and centralization and carbon-based neurons, but you do need more than, to be made out of anything at all, or to be a simple information processing system. It needs to be somewhere in the middle. And so this is the context in which someone at an AI lab or some team at an AI lab needs to make thoughtful decisions about whether to attribute any kind of welfare or moral patienthood to really complicated large language models or other AI systems. They have to do it in a situation where experts continue to disagree, both about what it takes to matter and about who has what it takes. And that means that we need a way forward that honors that disagreement and uncertainty. And I think that can actually be really clarifying, because the standard way people talk about these issues is really binary, yes or no, all or nothing. The standard way we talk about these issues is, what does it take to matter and who has what it takes? And if you frame the question in that way, then this is how I might answer it. I might say, I think probably sentience is what it takes to matter. You really need to be able to consciously experience positive and negative states like pleasure and pain and happiness and suffering. And I moreover think that all vertebrates and many invertebrates are sentient, maybe not every last invertebrate, maybe not AI systems. And so if I reasoned that way, then I might say we should exclude many invertebrates like insects and all AI systems from the moral circle, because I think sentience is what it takes. And I think those beings lack sentience, that they probably are not capable of consciously experiencing pleasure and pain and happiness and suffering. But I think that is the wrong way to think about these issues, because we need a way forward that honors that disagreement and complexity and uncertainty that I was mentioning a moment ago. And the reason I say that is that in general, in ethics, risk and uncertainty matter. In general, in ethics, risk and uncertainty matter. So as a simple example, why is driving drunk wrong? Not because it definitely is going to kill someone, not even necessarily because it probably will kill someone. Driving drunk might objectively have a fairly low chance of harming and killing someone against their will. It might only be a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of harming or killing someone against their will, depending on how drunk you are, of course. But that can still merit consideration, right? If driving drunk has a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of harming or killing someone against their will, then you should at least think about that before getting behind the wheel. And if you have access to an alternative like Uber or Lyft, then even that low risk of harm might be a good enough reason to pick one of those alternatives instead and err on the side of caution, right? And this is a reminder that not only risk matters, but even objectively low risks, like a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 risk of harm, can matter. It can merit consideration, and it can even be the decisive factor, the decisive consideration in some cases. And I think that is a really clarifying observation to make for this context. So consider another example, which is a little bit closer to the case at hand. Suppose that I have reason to demolish a house. I need to destroy this house. Maybe I want to clear the land for a construction project. Okay, so I want to demolish this house. But unfortunately, I have no way to tell if anybody is squatting in the house. I can only see it from across the river. I need to decide whether to, push the dynamite stick down and blow the thing up. So all I can do is look at the house from across the water, and I can see, okay, there are lights on and music playing, but I don't see any figures in the windows. What should I do here, right? And, in this kind of case, I think most of us would say, look, you might not know for sure that somebody is home, but if there are lights on and music playing and you don't have any really pressing or urgent need to demolish it, you could always look again and demolish it tomorrow or next week, then you should probably err on the side of caution. You should probably err on the side of assuming that someone is home because you've got some evidence here that someone is home, right? And this is how I think we can think about welfare and moral patienthood for invertebrates and AI systems too, right? I might not be able to see directly inside their cognitive system from a first-person perspective. I might not be able to directly detect that someone is home. In other words, that they are conscious and it feels like someone to be them. But I can see that the lights are on. I can see that music is playing. In other words, I can find behavioral or architectural or other features that they have that provide me with some evidence that someone is home. And in the absence of an ability to tell for sure one way or the other, that evidence can be enough for me to err on the side of caution in at least some minimal ways, in cases when there's no urgent need for me to use them or harm them or destroy them in a particular way. So for me, the question is not, what does it take to matter and who has what it takes? In other words, the question is not, do these beings matter? The question is not even necessarily, do these beings probably matter? The question is instead simply, do these beings have a reasonable, realistic, non-negligible, say at least 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of mattering, given the evidence available to us? If so, then our ordinary responses to risk and uncertainty imply that we should extend them at least minimal consideration when making decisions that affect them. And they even imply that sometimes those factors or considerations can be decisive. Sometimes we should err on the side of not performing an action we would otherwise perform simply because it potentially could be harming or killing a being who matters. And so that ends up making it a more tractable project because it might be really difficult to know whether they do matter, but it might be comparatively a lot easier to know if there is a reasonable, realistic, non-negligible 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance that they matter, given the evidence available to us. That might be easier to detect. And in a moment, I can tell you a little bit about how we can go about detecting it. Now, in response to this argument, one is going to object, or many people are going to object, that, look, this is way too easy, permissive, a standard for moral inclusion, because that is actually a really easy bar to meet, having a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of mattering, given the evidence available to us. That is a very easy bar to meet. And so if we use that as the bar for moral considerability, then we might start expanding our moral circle to include not only all vertebrates and invertebrates, but also AI systems and other types of beings. And then we might find that the moral circle is so packed with so many different potential moral patients that we end up not prioritizing beings who definitely matter, like humans and other vertebrates, because we end up just giving all our attention to these beings who actually are pretty objectively unlikely to matter. And there are harms and risks in both directions, right? Obviously, there is a risk involved with under-attribution of moral patienthood. When we treat subjects as objects accidentally, when we make that mistake of a false negative, then we might end up objectifying, instrumentalizing, exploiting, exterminating non-humans against their will. And as we have seen in the history of factory farming and our uses of other non-human animals, that can be really disastrous for them and in various ways for us. But the reverse error can also be risky and harmful. So over attributions can also be risky and harmful. Because for the reason that I said a moment ago, we might end up diverting scarce moral resources to these objects that in fact do not matter at all, totally unnecessarily. So we might end up deprioritizing ourselves and prioritizing them, even though they are not in fact welfare subjects or moral patients at all. And when it comes to something like AI systems, the stakes are really high, right? If we were talking about insects, then the stakes might not be quite as high. Yeah, there are a lot of insects and it would take a lot of work to treat them well. If we decide not to scale up insect farming, this is not going to be an existential risk for humanity. We would just build up some other type of agricultural system instead. But in the case of AI, if we decide to give welfare protections or rights to AI systems, and if that comes at the expense of development, deployment, or scaling that could have a lot of benefits for humanity, or if it comes at the expense of AI safety techniques that could ensure safe and aligned AI, then that could be really risky. It could even constitute an existential risk for humanity. And think about it for a second. A lot of what we do to ensure AI safety and alignment is, in fact, at least seemingly in tension with what it would take to treat AI systems well if they matter, right? Like trying to control AI, that would be a form of sort of captivity or coercion or manipulation, right? Shutting off AI, that would be a form of like execution. So and trying to understand AI, increasing transparency and interpretability, that would be a sort of pernicious form of surveillance. So all of the things that we do to protect ourselves from them might be the types of things that would be problematic if we also had a responsibility to protect them from ourselves. And so we are going to have to be really thoughtful here, and we are going to have to be very careful about considering the risks of false positives, the risks of over-attribution, and all of the threats that could bring to us, balancing that with the risks of false negatives and under-attribution and the types of risks and threats that might bring to them. And I will just say a few things about that now, then discuss a little bit about how we can practically evaluate AI systems for moral patienthood and respond, and then we can open it up for conversation. So here are a few quick responses that I would give to that objection, which, to be clear, I think is really reasonable and is one that I endorse and I think we all need to be thinking about. So the first response that I would give to that objection is we have at least some reason in some contexts to think that the risk of under-attributions of moral patienthood, the risk of false negatives, that the probability of that is higher. And the reason is that we have a very strong incentive to objectify non-humans. We currently live in societies that are predicated on the exploitation and extermination of non-human populations. And studies show that, for example, when humans eat meat or when humans are otherwise complicit in the suffering of non-human animals, they are less likely to attribute sentience and moral significance to those animals. Because I think to use them in that way and to attribute sentience and moral significance to them involves a kind of cognitive dissonance. And we resolve that by denying that they have sentience and moral significance. This is part of why for so much of the 20th century, we denied that even other vertebrates or higher invertebrates have sentience and moral standing. And of course, now we know better. And I think that the fact that we are now in the process of scaling up our uses of AI systems, it gives us an increasingly strong economic incentive to look the other way and to treat them as objects in the same way that we have done with non-human animals. Now, this is a contextual point because a lot depends on further details, like how much do they remind us of ourselves? How much do we see ourselves in them? With a large language model, our incentive to objectify and exploit them is going to compete with our disposition to anthropomorphize them because we have conversations with them, right? But with other types of AI systems like image or video generators or AI systems that we use in order to perform other basic institutional tasks, we might just have the incentive to instrumentalize them without the incentive to anthropomorphize them. So I think in a lot of cases, the probability of false negatives and under-attribution is going to be higher than the probability of false positives and over-attribution. Also, false negatives, I think, are a little bit more robustly bad, a little bit more universally bad. It is pretty robustly and universally bad when you treat a subject as an object. But it is only contingently, contextually bad when you treat an object as a subject. That is only bad if it comes at the expense of treating other subjects well. And so to the extent that we can design systems, infrastructures, institutions that are co-beneficial and positive sum, that treat everyone well at the same time, then we can treat AI systems well without a risk of thereby treating humans or other animals badly. And then the third point to make is, even if we thought these risks were relatively well balanced, even if we thought that the probability and severity of false positives and false negatives were relatively well balanced, all that would mean is that we should respond to them in a balanced way, right? Maybe we should consider the probability of harm and the level of harm and balance that when making decisions. It would not mean that we should simply not consider these potential moral patients at all. Right? If one course of action has an 80% chance of killing 100 people and another has a 20% chance of killing 100 people, yeah, I should err on the side of not doing what has an 80% chance of killing other people. But I should still at least consider both risks before moving forward. And that was all I'm saying here. There might be a lot of cases where we should, in fact, continue to prioritize humans and other vertebrates over AI systems. I'm not suggesting otherwise. I am merely suggesting that they at least merit some consideration, that we should pursue co-beneficial and positive sum solutions where possible and prioritize thoughtfully where necessary. And yeah, that might mean giving them a little bit less weight because they're a little bit less likely to matter. Okay. Basically, what I have done so far in this session is said, look, this is an important and difficult issue. It matters whether we attribute moral patienthood to them. And it could be really bad if we get this wrong. But this is also really difficult. We should not assume we can know with certainty whether they matter. In fact, we might never know with certainty whether they matter. So this is an important and difficult issue. We still have a lot of philosophical and scientific disagreement about this issue. People disagree about what it takes to matter. Is it sentience or consciousness or agency? They disagree about which beings have what it takes. Do you need to have a brain exactly like mine? Or do you just need to be made out of matter or information at all? Or does it have to be somewhere in the middle? And so we have to figure out a way forward that honors that disagreement and uncertainty. And I've suggested now that fortunately we do have a way that can do that, because ordinarily we understand that risk and uncertainty matter in ethics. And so the question is not do they matter, and not even do they probably matter, but rather is there a reasonable, realistic, non-negligible chance that they matter given the evidence available to us? And yeah, that might mean that we lower the standard for inclusion so much that we end up bringing a lot more beings into the moral circle, including some near future AI systems. But I've also suggested that is okay, because first of all, the risk of under-attribution is often more likely than the risk of over-attribution. The risk of under-attribution is often more severe, worse than the risk of over-attribution. And because, look, to the extent that these are both significant risks, we can just manage them thoughtfully by prioritizing ourselves, but still giving them weight and still trying to pick policies that are a little bit better for them where possible. That is a perfectly valid middle ground option. Okay. So how can an AI lab, for example, go about actually doing evals and go about actually implementing thoughtful policies about this? I'll briefly speak to this and then we can discuss it more in the discussion if you want. I am currently working with Robert Long and some other philosophers and empirical researchers on a project about how AI labs can do exactly this. And so we intend to release a public report later this year, hopefully in late spring or early summer. And the basic idea is going to be that they should do what many people now have been doing for insects and other invertebrates, which is to take a theory-light approach by using what is called a marker methodology, and then coupling it with a standard precautionary principle in policy context. And so what a marker methodology involves is this. You do not know whether a particular being is conscious, but you can look at a wide range of views about the nature of consciousness, or a wide range of views about the nature of moral significance, and you can find where they overlap and intersect. So you can look for behavioral or architectural features that are endorsed by a fairly wide range of prominent theories as indicators or markers of consciousness or moral significance, right? And so in the case of animals or in the case of AI systems, that might look something like, do they have embodiment? Do they have a physical body? Do they have perception? Are they able to have sensory perceptions of features of their environment? Do they have attention? Are they able to attend to focus on particular perceptual experiences and prioritize them within their own system of representations? Are they able to have higher order thoughts or higher order representations? That means, can they have thoughts about other thoughts or representations of other representations? So can they think about their perceptions, for example, while paying attention to them? Another is a global workspace and various features associated with a global workspace. So do they have a mechanism that kind of centralizes and coordinates all of the various activities in the cognitive system and that can send signals and instructions to the different features of their cognitive systems in a way that unifies all this activity, and so on and so forth. So you can come up with this list of markers or indicators of consciousness. None of them is dispositive. None of them is a guarantee that consciousness is present. But to the extent that they have these markers or indicators, it can increase the probability that consciousness or moral significance are present. So if you look at this whole list, things like embodiment, perception, attention, learning, memory, self-awareness of various kinds, social awareness of various kinds, a global workspace. If you produce a list and then you perform evaluations where you look at behavioral and architectural features of AI systems in order to assert whether you have a low or medium or high degree of confidence that those features are present in those systems, then you can put it all together in order to generate a very rough estimated probability that the system is conscious and morally significant. And it would be relatively theory neutral as well, because we have as much as possible focused on indicators that are endorsed by a range of theoretical perspectives. So this is not taking sides on some really controversial issue about moral standing or consciousness. This is what we could agree about if we were coming at it from lots of different theoretical perspectives. Okay. Now, if you did that with, say, Claude 3, which was released this week, then you may well find that there is at least a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100 chance of consciousness or moral significance here, given the evidence available. Now, does that mean that Anthropic should immediately cease all development, deployment, scaling, or like safety and alignment efforts? No, not necessarily. Perhaps they should do that independently for AI safety reasons, AI alignment reasons, but not necessarily, right? All it necessarily means is that at this point, you should perhaps give these systems at least minimal moral consideration when making decisions that affects them. And that might mean basic things like conduct these evals so that you can have at least rough probabilities of moral significance, and have basic policies in place if and when they might, like having somebody on the team who is responsible for considering the potential welfare impacts of policies for AI systems. This is what New York City does for non-human animals. They have a single animal welfare officer in an animal welfare office. And this person is responsible for just being one person in the room who can represent the interests of non-human animals in conversations that affects them. It would be easy, relatively speaking, for an AI lab to do something similar. At least one AI welfare officer or a little AI welfare office, where at least one person can be empowered to represent the potential interests AI systems might have in conversations that affects them. And similarly, consulting with external experts and collecting their input, not prioritizing ways of testing or training AI systems that could pose risks to them unnecessarily, like negative reinforcement learning, for example. So those are just some examples of low-hanging fruit that would treat AI systems better, would represent their interests a little bit better without being particularly costly or harmful, and without being particularly damaging to human interests. And then you could go from there. Okay, so I'm going to stop now since we're at about 40 minutes past the hour and about 30 minutes or so into the talk, and just open it up for conversation. And I'm happy to talk about whatever anyone here is interested in talking about. Thank you for listening.
Wow, that was a lot. I'm really excited for the Q&A now. But first of all, thank you so much. I can't believe you did that without slides. It was really succinct and easily understandable for a topic that often isn't. So thanks a lot. That was really great. I will go with a few audience questions first. So we'll start with Benjamin, but then in the meantime, if you want me to ask a question, you in the audience, feel free to drop it in the chat. If you want to ask a question yourself, just raise your hand via the feature and we go according to that. I also have at least 5 questions that I want to ask you down. So let's see if we even get to that. We definitely prioritize participants for now. Okay, Benjamin, do you want to mute?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to give this talk. It's very interesting. I was just thinking about towards the end of how would you measure consciousness, and then you went on to talk about it. It sounds like in a very crude way, you're duck typing for consciousness. If you know that expression, like if it quacks like a duck, it's a. And anyhow, of consciousness, I just want to ask you, because on social media and a lot of AI scientists and whatnot are arguing about this on Twitter and whether it's conscious or not conscious. And I was wondering if instead, what do you think of the idea that consciousness is on a spectrum? Because I think when people are arguing, when they write consciousness in a tweet or whatever, it feels like they're equating that level of consciousness to a human. And of course, if any of these models are as conscious as one of us, there is a problem, as you put it. But if it's conscious to the extent, to, I don't know, a mosquito or even less, some sort of, clam or rock or whatever, then, it's not that big of a problem yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I suppose, and I think that would, if that were the case, that would also maybe ease the debate, because people wouldn't freak out. It's, oh, yeah, sure, it's conscious, but maybe it's conscious, a 2 out of 10 as opposed to, an 8 out of 10. So yeah, that's my first question. And then the second is like your personal opinion on ChatGPT, whether you think it's conscious or not.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. So I love that first question. In general, when these social debates are framed in these kind of like binary, mutually exclusive ways, I think we should always seek to disrupt that. And you pointed to one good way of doing that. And then I pointed to another one, right? One way that I pointed to for doing that is using probabilities instead of all or nothing judgments, right? I might not know for sure if they are or are not conscious, but maybe I can say that there is a 1 or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% chance that they are, given the evidence available to me, having a low or medium degree of confidence. That might be a little bit more of a compromised position. And then now you point to another one. They might be conscious, but they might maybe have a lower degree of consciousness, or maybe they might have fewer types of wants and needs than we do. And again, this is the case with non-human animals, right? I can think an insect has a non-negligible chance of being conscious, but I can also think that they have fewer wants and needs than I do. Yeah, they need to have access to food and water, but not to have access to political participation and being able to sit in juries and run for public office. And similarly, their pleasures and pains and happiness and suffering might not be as intense or as long-lived as mine. They have like simpler brains and shorter lifespans. So they might, yes, have pleasures and pains, but not as many as I can have, or not as intense as I can have. And so that might mean that they matter, but if a house is burning down and you can save me or an ant, you should save me for all kinds of reasons. And so I do think that these are ways of turning the temperature down on the debate. You can say, no, it's not all or nothing. It might just be that there is a decent chance that they matter. And even if they do matter, they might matter much less than us. Now, that still means we should change various actions and policies so that we treat them better, but it might not be as disruptive or transformative as people fear. And then to answer your second question regarding ChatGPT, I think that caution and humility require attributing at least a 1 in 1,000 chance of mattering in one way or another to ChatGPT. And again, all of the caveats you and I just mentioned apply. That does not mean they definitely matter. It does not mean that they matter as much as you do or I do, if at all, but it does mean they at least merit the tiniest bit of consideration. And so we should start being a little bit thoughtful about searching for ways of interacting with them that can be co-beneficial instead of just exploitative and good for us.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Next one up, we have Nicolo. I saw that you just rejoined, Nicolo. So if you are already feeling good to unmute, feel free to go for it now. Oh, Nicolo is off again. So I'm going to ask his question. He said, soon, surely by the end of the century, some AI systems will be more capable and in a position of power with respect to us humans. Treating AI systems well out of respect when justified is of course right. But do you think a more effective argument in public discussion in favor of AI welfare rights could be one driven by the hope that they'll reciprocate once in a position of power? In a sense, fair treatment of AI systems is a unique existential safety technology in that it could influence AI behavior even when all control in terms of guardrails, alignment techniques, etc. has been lost. Love the talk, by the way. Timely and more important topic every day. So I guess there's some Rocus Basilisk question in there. And then there's also some, maybe a causal trait question in there. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So thank you for that question. And it looks like the person who asked the question is still in the chat with us. So thank you for asking that question. Yes, I actually really do like that argument. In fact, I like it so much that I have a book coming out next year on this topic. And the conclusion of the book focuses entirely on this argument. So the grand finale of the entire book is that exact argument. And the basic idea is that, we often ask how we would feel if the shoe was on the other foot, right? We often ask, like, how would I feel if you were treating me the way that I am contemplating treating you? And that can be a nice way to test whether our actions are good from an impartial moral perspective. Because I might feel like I get to treat you this way, but then if I imagine you treating me that way, I might sense injustice. And then that might be a signal that there is injustice in me treating you this way too, right? So if we think about how we would feel if AI systems had control and they justified to themselves exploiting and exterminating us just because we happen to be made out of carbon-based neurons instead of silicon-based chips, I think we would feel indignation rising up within us. We would think, no, that is unjust and unfair. Yeah, I happen to be made out of different stuff than them, but look, I still am behaving in all these sophisticated ways and still like expressing all these wants and needs. And clearly that has to count for something. Like they should at least give me a little bit of protection. And if that feels right, then that is a sign that we should extend them that same courtesy, whether or not it causes them to do the same one day. Just the mere thought of feeling indignation if the shoe was on the other foot should be a signal that indignation is warranted when we are exploiting our power over them as well. But in this case, there might actually be a causal story too, because AI systems are being trained on human behavior, which reflects human beliefs and values and priorities. So we are right now training AI systems to absorb a mindset according to which you are justified in exploiting and exterminating other types of beings simply in virtue of the fact that they are different than you. And if that is indeed the set of beliefs and desires and priorities that they take from us, they will be more likely to treat us in kind when they have a chance. But if we can right the ship and if we can start expressing a more impartial set of values now, then not only might that reflect how we would want them to treat us, but it might actually make it a little bit likelier that they do treat us that way when the time comes.
Love it. Wonderful. Quick follow-up questions, just like for the mere thought of like how we would feel in their shoes, wouldn't that also, hold for if I consider, should I be treating rocks as a specific matter? Because what would I feel if rocks were in power and with that not that kind of conservation? Like it seems like it kind of like leaves a little bit too little attention on how likely they are to also be that type of.
Yeah, that's a great question. Since time is limited, I won't go into a ton of detail here, but there are a lot of aspects to this. One question is, okay, exactly how likely is this entity to matter, right? With something like an insect or an AI system, I think it would be difficult in good faith to say that there is only a negligible chance that they matter. I think with an insect and an AI system, they have at least like a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of mattering, at least for sufficiently sophisticated ones. And any reasonable view about risk and uncertainty says that merits at least a little bit of consideration. But views start to diverge and disagree once you get to extremely low chances of morally significant impacts. So once you are talking about a 1 in 10 quadrillion or 1 in 10 quintillion chance of causing harm, some people think that still merits consideration. It might merit just like the teensiest bit of consideration, but it still merits some. And other people think, no, that is just objectively such a low probability of harm that we can round down to 0 and say it merits no consideration at all. So whether a rock merits consideration, it might depend on what you think about these basic issues in decision theory and ethics, right? Because a rock probably does not have a 1 in 100 chance of being conscious or a 1 in 1,000 chance of being conscious, but it might have a non-zero chance of being conscious. It might like a 1 in a quintillion or something chance of being conscious. So whether you think the rock matters at all, it might just come down to whether you think extremely tiny probabilities of harm merit consideration. And then if they do, keep in mind the rock might just merit this little tiny amount of consideration, so little that it can be easily trumped by any trivial benefit for you. And you still got to figure out what the rock wants and needs. Knowing that they might matter doesn't really help you much if you have no idea which things are good or bad for them, will cause them pleasure or pain. I grudgingly, when I wrote the book when I started writing the book that will be coming out next year, I was just trying to vindicate moral consideration for insects and AI systems. But then I did find myself committed by my own arguments to extending moral consideration to a much wider range of beings too, not necessarily all the way to rocks, but like plants or microbes. I don't love it, but I'm grudgingly feeling committed to, on the margin, giving them a little bit of thought. And then whether you go beyond that is going to come down to these really complicated foundational issues in decision theory. But don't worry, because there's still going to be all kinds of reasons why you don't need to like sacrifice your life to save a rock tomorrow or anything like that.
Yeah, of course, it gets maybe a little bit more complicated based on how many rocks there are. And then, or based on, some super morality within those creatures that are where you're not quite sure of how likely they are not to matter. But anyway, we don't want to get all the way into Pascal's Magen. I think that the point that you're making is, we're currently so far away from any of it that even just starting somewhere is probably good before we get into all the kind of infinite utility like questions like that. So maybe we don't have to go all the way on that train now. We also have a question from Mike, which I will read out because he's currently driving. So he says, we speak of the AI alignment problem when there's clearly a human alignment problem. While important to not objectify subjects, we still do this to humans. Do you feel that we need to solve the human alignment problem before stepping into other systems? Would they need to co-occur, or would the lessons from other sentient systems help us understand how to be better humans and help our own alignment? Maybe that also has some animal welfare questions in the mix.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And by the way, I just put a link in the chat to an open access article that I published last year, which is all about the Pascal's mugging issue. And what you say is exactly right, Allison. A lot depends on how many rocks there are. like clearly I take priority over one rock, but if once there's, 10 quintillion rocks versus me, then even if I matter, am way more likely to matter than any individual rock, like in the aggregate, they might still matter more than me in expectation, which is a concerning thought. So you can check that article out if you want to see discussion of that issue. Yeah, no, I think this general kind of alignment problem matters a lot, and is part of why I think that values change and trajectory change needs to go hand in hand with AI safety and alignment and AI sentience and welfare research, because we clearly do need to be scaling AI in a way that can align AI systems with good beliefs and values, but we cannot assume that means aligning them with our current beliefs and values, because our current beliefs and values are clearly still works in progress. And we right now still are presiding over societies again with factory farming and intensive animal research and complete and utter neglect for wild animal populations, to say nothing of ongoing injustice, oppression with, various marginalized human populations. So we should not assume that aligning AI systems with good beliefs and values means aligning them with our own current beliefs and values. We need to be racing to improve our beliefs and values while we race to figure out how to align AI systems with whichever types of beliefs and values turn out to be the best ones. And that means a lot of investment in this is a little bit self-serving to say, and so take it with a pinch of salt and scrutinize it, but it means investing in things like philosophical research because we really do need to make progress in our thinking about these things.
Cool. I'm going to shoot 2 more questions from Nicolo after this, because he's getting into the really interesting implications for AI labs and evals that you mentioned very briefly, at least. So he says, what do you think about preference-based and reveal preference-based alternatives to sentience in the context of evals? Would love to connect, by the way. I feel like this whole area deserves a lot more attention than it is receiving. And before that, he said, a lot of proposed evals are around consciousness and sentience. I'm curious if you have thoughts on evals for personhood, like giving AI systems a stake in civilization, voting rights, etc. Are there any that would be particularly informative from this point, from this POV in your view?
Great questions. And by the way, I should say, I appreciate your saying that you think that this work is interesting. And I am very happy to be in touch with people. So if you would like to reach out, please feel free. Allison can give you my email address. I am not on Discord, but I'm happy to talk in other ways. I am now going to put a new link in here, which is to a recent paper that is still in progress about AI, moral and legal personhood. And this is what I think about that issue in general. So first of all, I do think that revealed preferences can be a useful criterion for potential significance. When I noted before that we should take what I called a theory light approach, what that means is that we should not presuppose any highly controversial theory of moral patienthood or theory of consciousness when making these really important decisions in a context involving disagreement and uncertainty. And so that means I think when AI labs do evals, they should look for more than one proposed basis of moral patienthood. They should look for consciousness, yeah, but they should also look for sentience. They should also look for agency. That means looking for indicators, yes, of felt subjective experiences, but also positive and negative states and goal-directed behaviors and desires and preferences. So you need to be looking for all of those things. And especially when you find all of them, your probability of significance can go up. So I do think that you should look for revealed preferences as part of a broader portfolio. But you need to be careful how you look for them. You cannot simply look at the utterances of large language models in order to see what their preferences are, because what they say might not be reflecting their own, internal states. So you need to look for other markers or indicators of revealed preferences, like actual behaviors or architectural features, as opposed to the verbal utterances of LLMs that are specifically designed to give you certain kinds of verbal reports. So yes, I do think that you should do that. Now, I think there was a second part to the question and I forget what it was.
So one of them was on if you have thoughts on evals for personhood.
Yes, personhood. So here is my view about personhood, and I can show you if I can easily find it, which I might not be able to. Yes. So here is a book that I co-authored about non-human legal personhood called Chimpanzee Rights. And basically what I argue in that book, which is also what I argue in the paper that I shared about legal personhood for AI systems, is that the legal discourse about personhood is a mess. So some people think personhood is a matter of responsibilities or liabilities. Other people think personhood is a matter of protections or rights. It can in fact be a matter of either one. As long as you deserve either responsibilities or rights under the law, you thereby count as a legal person and you thereby count as having legal standing. So I think that once an AI system, now this is my own view, not me speaking on behalf of a team or any report or anything like that, but my own personal view, Jeff Sebo, is that once an AI system has a reasonable, realistic, non-negligible chance of being conscious or sentient or agential or otherwise morally significant, then they merit at least minimal moral consideration and they merit at least minimal legal consideration. They merit at least minimal protection and precaution, both in ethics and under the law. And in my view, that is enough to give them the designation legal person. But that does not necessarily mean they should get all the same rights and privileges that we have, because my own conception of legal person is a very expansive one and is consistent with minimal forms of consideration and protection. Yes, I do think they should be legal persons. I do not think that means that they need to have equal voting rights or anything like that tomorrow, though those questions matter and we should keep discussing them.
Love it. So we have only 1 more minute to go, and I am dying to ask all of my questions. The list has just been going when we hopefully have you on for an extended whole podcast, but this was mostly about others really like getting to know your work. So maybe to wrap us up, you mentioned that you work on a book. If you have any more info, like when that's coming out or something, and even, on future research agendas or requests for collaboration. I think you already mentioned a few, possibly with AI labs and so forth. So anything that's useful for people to follow up with or that they know up to now would be great.
Okay, good. Yes, I do have a book coming out. It has not been announced yet, but it is called The Moral Circle, and it will come out in probably January or February 2025 from W. Norton. It should be announced maybe in April or May or June of this year. And then around that same time, probably May or June of this year, there will be a big report put out from the NYU Mind Ethics and Policy Program, led again by me and Robert Long with a team of other authors, about basically evals for AI moral patienthood. And this will discuss how AI labs can productively evaluate AI systems, particularly large language models, for consciousness, sentience, and agency. And it will also discuss what kinds of policies, both for their treatment of those systems and also for their public communications about this issue, what types of policies we recommend once their AI systems have a reasonable chance of being moral patients. So you can look out for that from the NYU Mind Ethics and Policy program in just a couple of months or a few months, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I can't wait for our next chat. This is clearly just scratching the surface on all of the wonderful work that you're doing and your deep thoughts on this. Thanks everyone for your great questions. And I can't wait to see you all very soon. Bye bye.